ठीक है. So yeah, so abhi basically I would say the majority of studies that we do in UG or PG or like majority are this kind of studies, the cross sectional studies. So what exactly is a cross sectional study? So here it's a kind of a snapshot study, I should say. Whatever we do in this study, that has got nothing to do with the person's data in the past or future. कि हम उस अभी उसके स्टेट्स या स्टैटिस्टिक्स क्या है कि हम उसमें चेक कर रहे हैं. टू गिव यू एन एग्जांपल, इट्स मोस्टली अ प्रिवलेंस काइंड ऑफ अ स्टडी. वी चेक कि अभी एक एरिया में कितने लोग को सपोज एक डिजीज है, कितने लोग आर सफरिंग फ्रॉम HIV सपोज, ठीक है, और सपोज दे आर सफरिंग फ्रॉम हेपेटाइटिस. So how many of them are suffering? That is one thing that we try to check. And apart from that, we see the other factors which are there in them currently and try to find out an association between them. Association would be explained better by Varun, but mostly इसमें हम ये देखते हैं कि currently जो statistics है उसका उनमें कुछ संबंध है क्या. कि suppose we are trying to study about hepatitis only, so we see कि what are the antigen status, what are its antibody status, किसमें कम है, किसमें ज्यादा है, what are the variations seen. Similarly अगर हम blood group या arterial compliance पे अगर study करते हैं, then we see few demographics data and then we compare it with other data. But इसमें proper case या control group नहीं होता. Whatever groups we get are based on the results. We don't pre-divide the groups. Also, the evidence from this study is much less because हम जो भी कर रहे हैं that's at only one point of time हम कर रहे हैं. That is, हम उसमें पहले उस पर्सन के साथ क्या क्या हुआ है, उसके कंप्लायंस कैसे थे या जो भी था वो हमें नहीं पता, और आगे कैसे वो प्रोग्रेस करने वाले हैं वो हमें नहीं पता. So the evidence from this study is not very high, and hence इसका it comes at the lower part of the evidence का pyramid. Okay. Apart from it, when we get what are the tests that can be used would be covered more by Varun. But I would just say कि इसमें mostly chi-square use करते हैं because we get the percentages, prevalence, proportions, those kind of things we get. And coming to more of application of this kind of study, maximal kind of studies like any knowledge attitude perception study, any prevalence study, or uh, any study where you are not asking कि पहले क्या था तुम्हारे साथ या बाद में क्या होने वाला है, where you are not following up, it is a cross sectional kind of a study. Okay. So that's all about a cross sectional study design. So further I would like to hand over to Anveshi to cover sampling techniques. So I hope I was clear. If there were any doubts in the whole discussion, we will cover that.
Hello. Hello.
Anveshi, switch the orientation of your screen. Yeah, thanks.
Hello.
You're audible. You're audible.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, yeah. So I'll be covering sampling techniques. So basically what happens ki, whatever study we do, it's on a universe. Universe includes people who live in a particular locality or people to whom you'll apply the results of your study. Each person in the universe is a sampling unit, and when you select a few people on whom you'll do the study, that's called a sample. And there are different ways to select a sample. Basically, it has to be such that the sample is representative of the target population. यानी कि जिस पे स्टडी किया है उसके जो रिजल्ट्स आए हैं, those results should be applicable to the whole universe or the target population जिनको like I'll tell you by an example. So if you have to study the adherence of medications among the diabetics, so diabetics all over the world is your target population. Then diabetics in a certain area, suppose Mumbai, is your study population, and then you select a few diabetics amongst those areas whom you'll recruit in your study, जिसके ऊपर आप study करोगे. So they are the study subjects or the sample. Okay. So there are different techniques different methods by which you select a sample. They're basically of two broad kinds. They're either probability methods or they're non-probability methods. So probability methods matlab they're based on certain probability ka laws such that it will be representative of the target population. Whatever sample you select will be representative of the target population, and whatever results you get, it will be applicable on the target population. So these, it's basically more superior, but it's inconvenient to do that. The other broad category is non-probability methods, in which you do not have, it's not very representative, but it's very convenient. There are different methods under each of them. So today what we'll be discussing, the journal papers that we'll be discussing, usme basically I've highlighted here the types of the methods that can be used. So among the probability methods, there's simple random sampling, which is basically like chit picking, जैसे lottery में chit निकालते हैं वैसे. Then there's systematic random. So systematic random is like if you have a room full of people, suppose 20 people, and you have to select 5, then you select every fourth person. So that is systematic random. So simple random is chit picking. Systematic random is selecting every fourth person or whatever. Like, then there's stratified random, in which there's a whole lot of people and you divide them into groups. And the groups are such that suppose if I'm studying anemia. So anemia, we know the hemoglobin cutoff for boys and girls would be different, right? So if I have a class, then I'll divide that class into boys and girls, and then from among them, I'll select people for the study using simple random or systematic random method. Okay? Using simple random or systemic random method. So this thing is called a stratified random. Among the non-probability methods that can be used in the papers that we'll be seeing is convenience. So convenience is like जो भी आसपास available है उस person को आप recruit कर रहे हो. But convenience में there's always, like in any of the methods to select the sample, there's always an something called as an inclusion criteria as an and an exclusion criteria. So people who fulfill your inclusion criteria, that's basically something like most of the studies have keep people more than 18 years of age so that they can give consent to be recruited into the study. Something like that. And exclusion criteria is something like somebody in ICU, you do not want to take a patient who's in ICU and too morbid to answer your questions. Something like that. So yeah, non-probability mein there's convenience, which is basically you select people who are accessible to you. Then there's purpose, which is based on researchers' personal judgment. And personal judgment मतलब you see a person, you think कि probably इनके पास time होगा तो ये बैठ कर मैं questionnaire का answer देंगे पूरा वैसे. Then expert is like कि you select it ऐसे like convenience या purposes है, and then you let an expert decide whether your sample is actually representative of your target population or not. So that is still a way of kind of validating कि my way of selecting people wasn't so bad. And then there's quota. So quota में quota is like stratified random. You divide people into groups, but these groups are not based on something that will impact the study. For example, anemia में dividing it into boys or girls affected the hemoglobin ka cutoff level. But suppose if you divide it into like odd roll numbers and even roll numbers, that would be such a division into groups would be quota, and from then among the quota, then you choose people by simple random or systemic random. मतलब chit picking से select करो, नहीं तो systemic random से select करो. So that's all about it for today. Varun?
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll be giving you a brief overview about the common statistical tests that we use in our research, at least at our level, and it will tell you in brief about the tests that are used in the papers that you will be discussing. So I will take a common example and I'll give you this overview. So say that we've done a cross-sectional study where we are recording the blood pressure measurements of a group of individuals. Okay. And we are classifying it with respect to gender. So that would be male or female. And we are classifying it according to age. Okay. So let's take the first example. So over here, what you can see is I am dividing the group into males and females. Yeah, males and females. And I have divided them further into two groups, whether they have a low blood pressure or high blood pressure. Okay. So blood pressure, as we know, it is a continuous measurement. Okay. So you can put it on a continuous scale, or you could divide it into various categories, which I will be coming to later, or you can just put a simple cutoff saying low or high BP. Where over here, I've taken the cutoff as 120. So now I will also show you one of the documents that we had circulated before and how to use it. Basically, I find it very convenient to use this because at our level, we at least need to know what tests to be what tests should be used in which type of data. We need not know how to use a software exactly, but still we need to have a basic awareness of which test is to be used where. So I won't go into the details of the types of data, that's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. For now, just remember that interval and ratio are continuous forms of data. Nominal and ordinal are categorical forms of data, where ordinal forms of data can be arranged in a rank order. Okay, I think that much is going to be significant. And now, so let's take our first example. So we see we have two groups over here, low BP and high BP. Okay, so this form of the variable that we're discussing over here is a nominal form, and we have males and females. Okay, which is also a nominal form because we're just comparing two groups. Okay, so if we're comparing two forms of variables which are nominal in nature, okay, so in order to see if there's any significant difference in the blood pressures of males and females, if I'm plotting it this way, the test that I will have to use, as seen before over here, will be the chi-square test. Okay, so here we go, chi-square. Now, what I can also do is I can rank the blood pressure and I can make further subgroups. For example, if I'm taking, for example, the AHA 2017 guidelines for blood pressure, which is something that you will read in pharmacology eventually. Okay, so normal B, only the systolic cutoffs. The normal BP is less than 120. Elevated is 120 to 129. Stage 1 hypertension is 130 to 139, and stage 2 is greater than or equal to 140. So now I have created a rank order. So I have created groups, and I want to compare the difference between males and females. Okay. So accordingly, what we can see is I have one nominal form of data because that would be males and females. And the second is I have one ordinal form of data since I've created a rank order over here. Okay, so we can see amongst these ones which ones do we need to use over here. And since males and females are unrelated, in this case, I would use the Mann-Whitney U test. Compare two unrelated groups, nominal and ordinal. Okay, so I'll just write it down over here. We have time, right? Okay. And the third, okay, so what we tend to use very frequently is suppose I now plot the BP on the x-axis and the frequency of individuals on the y-axis. And now I compare the blood pressures of females by plotting it as one curve and males as one curve. So I've plotted BP as a continuous form of data right now, okay? And I'm comparing the difference between males and females. So now I have to see what test of significance do I have to use in this case. So what we can see is we have one nominal form of nominal variable, that is males or females, and we have one interval variable, okay, that is the BP. So in this case, I will have to use a t-test since I'm comparing between two groups, that is males and females. And since the groups are unrelated, I will be using an unpaired t-test, right? So here we can write it down. So For this, I will have to use an unpaired t-test. Now I'd like to compare this similarly with a different form of stratification. So previously I was comparing low and high BP in males and females, but I can also compare these BP differences with reference to age. So if I classify the population at the sample at hand into three age groups, that's less than 20, 20 to 40 years, and greater than 40. So I have three groups, and I'm dividing them into low and high BP. So again, I'm using nominal forms of data, but I have more than two groups this time. So as you can see, two nominal forms of data here, and any number of groups can be compared using the chi-square test. So again, the test of significance I will use over here is the chi-square. Second, if I use the same form of stratification of BP as I used above, that was normal, elevated, stage 1 and stage 2 hypertension, and I want to see the distribution with respect to age. In this case, I have one nominal form of data, that is age, and I have one ordinal form. Okay, so one nominal and one ordinal comparing uh, more than two groups, right? Since I have age less than 20, 20 to 40, and greater than 40 years. So in this case, I will have to use the Kruskal-Wallis test, and this is something that is actually used in the physiology paper that is going to be discussed today. So here we have Kruskal-Wallis test. And now suppose I have comparing the BP, I'm plotting it as a continuous variable over here, and I'm comparing three groups. Okay. So here we have less than 20, 20 to 40, and greater than 40. So in general, we know that that BP tends to increase with age. So now again, I have to see what tests to apply over here. Simple, just refer to the table. So we have one interval form of data. The BP we are taking as we are taking the BP as a continuous variable, and we have one nominal form of data, that is our age groups. But now we're comparing more than two groups. So now since we have to compare the means between greater than two groups, we'll have to use a one-way ANOVA test. So at our level, we basically need to know which test is to be used in what place. The details regarding how to apply these tests in the studies, in order to understand them, I would always recommend to consult a statistician, because it is not really within our scope to understand each and every intricate detail. And the last one that I would like to share about is when we're comparing two continuous variables. For example, let's take age, okay, on the x-axis, let's take BMI on the x-axis, and we'll take BP on the y-axis. So, and we're plotting each person over here. For example, one person has a BMI XYZ, has a BP so much. The other would have something like this, here, okay. So basically, we're plotting a scatter plot, and then we have to run a line that runs closely between all these points. So for example, I do this over here. Okay, so this is a typical scatter plot that we get. Okay, and now since I'm comparing two continuous variables, in that case, that means that I'm comparing two interval variables. Okay, so the test that we have to apply in this case would be a Pearson correlation coefficient, where we're saying, is there a linear relationship between the variables we're comparing? And if we convert one of these variables into a categorical, that is an ordinal form with a rank order, then in that case, we'll be using a Spearman rank order coefficient. Okay, so you can see two interval forms of data. We'll use a Pearson correlation test, and two ordinal forms of data. In that case, we'll use a Spearman rank order coefficient. So I think that this much is enough for a basic overview regarding the tests that we're going to use, that we'll be seeing in the papers that are going to be discussed today. You can refer to the PDF document that we've circulated for further details. And in order to understand these in further depth, I would recommend you all to look at the videos on the YouTube channel of Aspire, where the videos of biostats as taught by Pratap sir have been uploaded in the have been uploaded on the channel as a part of this thing, the workshop that was conducted by Aspire. Thanks. I think Sharesh or Nikhil, you can take
Thank
over.
you, Varun. Yes, thank you, Varun. Good evening, respected faculty members and members of the audience. I am Nikhil Sangtani, the Aspire Journal Club coordinator. I would like to start today's meeting by telling you the rules of the presentation. The topic of the presentation should be within the scope of health sciences. Presentation time is maximum 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute discussion, which would be open for questions, comments, and feedback from faculty members as well as students. The articles were selected after a thorough literature search by the presenters in the guidance of the subject matter and were approved by them. It is a sincere request to all the attendees of the journal club to keep their mics off while the presentation is going on. No one is allowed to speak in between. Those having any doubts can wait for the presentation to get over and can ask directly or type in the message box. So let's start with our first presentation of the day. The presenters are Riya Goyal, who is a third minor MBBS student, and Tejas Shah, third minor MBBS student. Both have been a part of a medical symposium team of our college. So I would request Tejas and Riya to start with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. Our topic for today is age-associated changes in physiological and biochemical arterial stiffness markers in apparently healthy individuals. William Osler said that a man is as old as his arteries. Arterial stiffness has been considered as a measure of aging. This stiffening occurs due to various functional and physiological changes, example fragmentation of elastin, increase in collagen, and hypertension leading to increased wall stress. Arterial stiffness correlates with cardiovascular disease, hence it is an important parameter. The measures of arterial stiffness, pressure wave velocity. As the heart contracts, it sends a pressure wave along the vasculature. The velocity of this wave is known as pressure wave velocity. Normally, this wave reflects at the distal arteries and comes back to the heart during the diastole. This increases the diastolic blood pressure and aids coronary circulation. Now imagine a string through which a wave is passing. The wave will pass faster through a taut string. A stiffened aorta acts like a taut string. Thus, the velocity of a wave increases as the stiffness of the aorta increases. And since the velocity increases, the reflected wave reaches the heart earlier, that is during systole. Therefore, the systolic blood pressure increases, the diastolic blood pressure decreases, and the pulse pressure increases. This is called as systolic augmentation. It increases the cardiac afterload and the coronary perfusion is reduced, thereby increasing the risk of cardiovascular diseases like MI. Now, the measurement of pressure wave velocity. In 1922, Bramwell and Hill first measured pressure wave velocity in humans. They determined the distance between the right carotid and the right radial artery and divided it by the time difference between the two pulse waves. Following this, aortic pulse wave velocity became popular as aortic stiffening directly affects coronary circulation. Then, cardiofemoral pulse wave velocity was used, but being a difficult procedure, its use is limited to research. In Japan, phonocardiography was combined with cardiofemoral pulse wave velocity. They measured the time difference between the second heart sound and the aortic notch of carotid wave pulse. The newest method is brachial ankle pulse wave velocity. It is easier to perform and has validity, reproducibility, and reliability similar to that of cardiofemoral pulse wave velocity. The second parameter is osteoprotegrin. It is a biochemical marker belonging to the TNF alpha superfamily. It inhibits osteoclast differentiation by inhibiting rank and rank ligand pathway. It is associated with vascular calcification. The third is the augmentation index. It is a measure of the increase in systolic pressure due to augmentation divided by the pulse pressure. Now, the objectives of the present study. First was to determine changes in various physiological and biochemical parameters like brachial ankle pulse wave velocity, systolic blood pressure of both central and peripheral, the serum OPG, triglyceride levels, etc. The second was to find correlation of various parameters with brachial ankle pulse wave velocity. Coming to the methodology of the study, it is a cross-sectional observational study with a sample size of 232, including 118 males and 114 females. The age of the participants was 30 to more than 60 years, and they were divided in 4 groups based on their age. The participants who were healthy without any cardiovascular diseases were included, and patients who were on antihypertensive or lipid lowering therapy were excluded from the study. The participants were asked to report in the morning without having any tea or coffee, after which a detailed history related to the cardiovascular system was taken. They were examined in supine position after 10 minutes of rest. The central and peripheral blood pressures and augmentation index was calculated using USCOM BP plus equipment. For brachial ankle pulse wave velocity, transducers were placed at the brachium and the ankle to obtain the waveforms from the brachial and posttibial artery respectively, as you can see in the diagram. The distance between the two transducers is calculated using the regression equation of the heart, brachial, and heart ankle distances. They are denoted by LB and LA in the following slide. But this equation is a regression equation with the height of the patient. But in this study, they made a small modification and used the superficial distance between the suprasternal notch and the point where the transducers were placed. The distance between the brachium and ankle was then divided by the time difference between the two waves, denoted as delta TBA. The next slide, you can see in this image the actual graph obtained in the study. And you can notice the difference. The brachial pulse comes before the posterior tibial pulse, and the time difference between the two is known as delta TB. The mean arterial pressure and pulse pressure ratio, that is the ratio of peripheral pulse pressure to central pulse pressure, was recorded from brachial and central BP, and the biochemical markers were assessed in the blood serum using calorimetric analysis. Serum OPG was assessed via enzyme immunoassay. The methods used for measurement of all parameters are derived from previous studies for the same. Now coming to the statistical analysis.
For the statistical analysis, the Shapiro-Wilk test was first applied on the data to check the distribution of the data. It was found that the data was non-normally distributed, due to which the central tendency used in the study is median. After this, the Kruskal-Wallis test was also applied within the groups that were formed between the male and female participants on the basis of the age to compare the individual parameters among the various age groups. Following this, the Spearman correlation was done to find the relation between the various physiological and biochemical parameters among each other. And on the basis of the associations found during the Spearman correlation, a mathematical regression analysis, that is a linear regression analysis, as well as a multiple regression analysis study was done on the available data. The results of the study in the median age of the male subjects was around 45.5 years, whereas that of the female subjects was around 47 years. The range that you can see in the bracket is the interquartile range. It was found that the height, the weight, and the pulse pressure ratio was on a significantly higher side in the male subjects, with a p-value of less than 0.05, making it statistically significant. The female subjects had a higher BMI, a higher augmentation index, central systolic blood pressure, and both the central and the peripheral pulse pressures. When the Kruskal-Wallis analysis was applied within the male participants, it was found that the participants age greater than 60 years had a higher augmentation index and a higher central and peripheral blood pressure. The pulse pressure also gradually decreased as the age increased. When the same analysis was applied on the female age group, it was found that here also the augmentation index and the central and peripheral pulse pressure was increased. But another thing which was noticed was the deranged lipid profile, or that the serum cholesterol, triglyceride, and the VLDL and LDL, all of them were found to be increased in the age group of greater than 60 years as compared to the first age group, that is around 30 to 40 years. And all of these were statistically significant. A lot more data was collected, but those were not found to be statistically significant and hence haven't been displayed here. When the Spearman correlation graph was plotted for the male participants, it found that the serum OPG level and the pulse wave velocity were associated and linearly related. And we can see only a few outliers here. That is the one who don't fall on the line representing the equation. When a similar plot was done for the female participants, here also most of the data fell on the line showing the relation, and very few outliers were found.
when multiple regression analysis was done for finding the association between brachial ankle pulse wave velocity and those of the other parameters, where the brachial ankle pulse wave velocity was considered as the dependent parameter, it was found that the serum triglyceride and osteoprotein were found to be positively associated, whereas the serum VLDL levels were found to be negatively associated. That can also be seen from the coefficient values of them. After that, to predict the value of the pulse wave velocity, we did a lot of linear regression analysis, based on which the three models that they derived were as follows, which are given on the table below. Now, by the interpretation of the results, although previous studies had shown that the pulse wave velocity and the age had a significant correlation, in this study there was no statistically significant association between them, although it increased on the basis of increasing age. The augmentation index was significantly increased with age, which was seen more in the females than in the males, whereas the systolic blood pressure and the pulse pressure increased with age, which was more or less similar in both the genders. The pulse pressure ratio declined with increasing age, which was more significant in males than in females, whereas the serum cholesterol and LDL, which increased with age, was more significantly seen in the female counterparts as compared to the males. And based on the regression models, we could also see that the serum OPG and the pulse wave velocity were significantly associated to each other.
Coming to the pros of the study, it is a novel, well-designed study. The methodology was appropriate and equipment was standard. Techniques used were suitable. Detailed statistical analysis of correlation of brachial ankle pulse wave velocity with various demographic and biochemical parameters is done. They have also provided the regression equations, thus giving their mathematical correlation. The study was published in a renowned journal, namely Indian Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology. The cons of the study: they had a small sample size which is not representative of the entire population, and thus the cutoff values cannot be determined. They have not included other parameters that may affect serum OPG like bone and parathyroid disorders, and the primary objective for which the study was powered is unclear from the paper.
Now the clinical applications or the implications. The brachial ankle pulse wave velocity can be used as a marker for assessing the cardiovascular health, and it is being increasingly used in cardiology clinics for preventive health checkups. It has a prognostic value for predicting risk of cardiovascular events and hypertension in apparently healthy individuals, but the results are not reliable if the patient is suffering from peripheral artery disease. High serum OPG levels are also associated with an increased future risk for myocardial infarction, stroke, total mortality, as well as increased mortality in cases of patients having ischemic heart disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria and Tejas. I would request Amit sir and Milind sir to give their opinions on the presentation.
Hello,
Hello. Yes, sir.
am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Can you just repeat the primary objective of the study and their final conclusion related to that primary objective?
Sir, as I mentioned in the article, the primary objective is not completely clear, but
Okay.
what we understood from it as is that their primary objective was to assess the parameters related to arterial stiffness, that is the brachial ankle pulse wave velocity and the augmentation index and the peripheral and central blood pressure as well as the pulse
Okay.
pressure ratio. And they also assessed various biochemical markers, and according to that, in the results, they've shown that these are associated with arterial stiffness and therefore they increase with increasing age, since arterial
Okay.
stiffness increases with age. That
Okay.
is what we understood, sir, from the primary
Okay.
objective.
Okay. There was one table which compared males and females demographic characteristics, and there were some p-values given there which were significant, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what does that mean actually?
That the increased in one of the genders was not that the increase was significant, as in it was seen that overall in the male subjects or in the female subjects, that parameter was seen to be on the higher side.
Okay,
And
so females were more dyslipidemic, is it?
With increasing age.
With increasing age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And was this defined anywhere in the objectives that they want to compare males and females also as regards all these physiological parameters?
No, sir.
Not really. What do you think is the implication of this study for our type of country? How will doing these physiological parameters help us? Will it predict the development of a cardiovascular or a peripheral vascular disease?
So at an early age, we can use it as a prognostic parameter, and brachial ankle pulse wave velocity has been increasingly used as a prognostic uh,
Okay.
factor. So
In other studies, no?
yes, sir. So that is the reason why this study has paved way for more future studies, multicentric studies in our country, which can prove whether it is really a prognostic uh, factor.
Do you think that if
Okay, so
these physiological parameters are correlated with clinical parameters of symptomatology and signs, will it be more useful?
So from the studies that we've read, brachial ankle pulse wave
Yeah.
velocity is more useful in the patients that they don't have the clinical parameters yet. They haven't developed,
Okay.
there
So
was a
as a
study which
screening method
said, yeah, as a
to see
screening,
for
it is more
people at
useful.
risk, to see people at risk, is it actually done anywhere
Yes,
in
sir.
India or abroad? Is this routinely done like for anything that is used for screening? No, you have to do it at a mass level. Say for example, a
Yes, sir.
person above 50 years, you do that index for all to predict which patients would have further risk of disease, right? That's the purpose of this
Yes, sir.
screening, is it?
So,
Yes,
so
sir.
this study is increasingly done in developed countries such as Japan, whereas that
Okay,
Japan is one of the pioneers in this technology, but in India
right.
it is not widespread as of yet.
Yeah, so why do you think it is not widespread use in India?
So because of the machinery and the technique needed for the
Yeah,
brachial ankle pulse wave velocity
yeah. So
measurement.
one is the methodology that may be not feasible to be used everywhere, and our huge population. It's very difficult to screen. No, Japan has a captive population. They have their details of the medical records of all their subjects right from their birth. So in a smaller country, which is a developed country, which has higher resources, we can use such screening methods on a mass scale. For a developing country like India, where resources are a problem, where cost benefit ratio may not be in favor, because we have so many disease burden as well as just due to infectious diseases itself, right? So when we employ any screening method, we have to think about the cost benefit ratio for the population as a whole. That's why it may not be so feasible today in India, but as our population ages and we skew our population mean age skews towards the right now it is between 20 to 30 years. As it goes beyond 40, okay, we will also have to do these screening methods. Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good study. It was a physiological study. I didn't understand much of it, but whatever results and conclusions you presented was very good.
thank you, sir.
I have never read a similar study in the past. That's why maybe I was a bit disconnected with it. But when you came back to the results and the conclusions and the clinical applications, things became more clear. Thank you. You have presented well.
So our next presenter is Soumitra Ginodia, who is a third minor MBBS student who has also been a part of a symposium team and has even presented many poster and paper presentations. So I would request Soumitra to start with his presentation.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Good evening, respected teachers, students, and all those who are listening. This is Soumitra Ginodia from 3rd MBBS, and I'm going to present on an anatomy article Three-dimensional
Samitra, can you
study.
be loud and slower? Can you be loud and slower?
Okay, sir. So I'll be presenting on the article Three-dimensional study of the musculotendinous architecture of supraspinatus and its functional correlations. I'll start with the basic introduction. So supraspinatus is one of the four rotator cuff muscles. It originates from medial two-thirds of supraspinous fossa and inserts onto the greater tubercle of humerus. It is supplied by the suprascapular nerve, which comes from the upper trunk of brachial plexus, so its root value being C5, C6. The main action of supraspinatus is to steady the head of humerus during movements of the arm. It also helps in abduction of shoulder joint from 0 to 15 degrees. So, according to previous studies, supraspinatus was one of the most commonly involved in shoulder pathologies. In individuals over 40 years having rotator cuff tears, supraspinatus was the most common muscle involved. The musculotendinous architecture was an important determinant of muscle function. Despite its prevalence and clinical importance of the supraspinatus pathology, the relationship between its architecture and the shoulder function had not been well studied till now. So these were some of the previous studies which were done using cadaveric dissection, USG, and MRI. These were descriptive studies which focused on the gross structure, and they gave an average value to different parameters like the fiber bundle length or the angle of pennation and all, and they did not give individual data to individual regions. So these are some of the limitations of the previous studies. The location of the fiber bundle sampling, which was used for calculating the architectural parameters, was not well documented in previous studies. The architectural parameters like bundle length or the pennation angle were measured only in few studies. So suppose say some studies had measured only bundle length, some studies had measured only the muscle volume. None of the studies had included enough parameters to conceptualize the muscle as a whole. Then the fiber bundle length, which was defined as an average value to the entire muscle, despite there being distinctive divisions and subdivisions within the muscle. So again, it does not help in clearly understanding the entire muscle. The pennation angles, which I'll be talking about further, they were measured in excised muscle from the cadaver after taking it out, rather than in situ, which was done in this study. So there could be some discrepancies regarding the final values of measurements. So with this all previous data, the researchers of this study started their study with the aim to investigate and quantify the 3D musculotendinous architecture of supraspinatus throughout its volume. So this will make the functional correlation easy, and it is a descriptive type of study. Moving on to the methodology, the 10 formalin embedded human cadaveric specimens were selected with a mean age of 61.9 years. It was convenient sampling and not probability sampling. Any specimen with gross shoulder abnormality or any previous surgery or any tendon pathology were excluded from the studies. Also, they mentioned that all the female specimens which they got had some tendon pathologies. So they excluded all the female specimens from the study. So in every cadaver, the supraspinatus was exposed first by removing the superficial fascia, and then the shoulder joint was fixed with metal plates screwed to humerus. This helped in later reconstruction of the muscle. After that, the periphery of the supraspinatus tendon was outlined with points, and each point digitized using microscribe G2 digitizer to obtain the XYZ coordinates of all the points. Then after the tendon work was done, they moved on to the supraspinatus muscle belly, which was dissected serially with a dissection microscope. And at each layer, 10 to 60 fiber bundles were identified, and they were traced from all the attachment sites, from medial to the lateral attachment sites. After all the fibers in all the layers had been digitized, the remaining tendon was cut. Then after this all had been done, the digitized data was entered into Maya software. So this software works on 3D animation and 3D animation and reconstructing models. So this helped to view the supraspinatus belly as well as the tendon throughout its volume. The different architectural parts of the muscle were identified, and all the tendinous attachments of different parts were also studied. So as you can see in the analysis, these were the architectural parameters they studied. First was the fiber bundle length. Fiber bundle length is the sum of distances between each of the digitized points along the fiber bundle. Next was the pennation angle. So pennation angle is basically the angle between the longitudinal axis of muscle and its fibers. So the longitudinal axis of entire muscle is a line of force along which a line of action along which the muscle generates its force, and its individual fibers may be deviated from this line. So the angle between those two becomes the pennation angles. The other parameters they studied were muscle volumes and dimensions of intramuscular as well as extramuscular tendons. So as you can see here, the from the medial to lateral is the line of force. And you can see on the muscle fiber bundle, there are small, small dots. So those were the digitized points. And the sum of all the distances between them led to the whole distance of the fiber bundle. And you can see the line of force is from medial to lateral. So while the medial attached end, if you see, there is some angle between the fiber and the line of force. So that becomes the medial angle of pennation. And similarly, on the lateral attached side, it becomes the lateral angle of pennation. The statistics which they used in this study were descriptive statistics, which was based on mean, standard deviation, and range. They used this for fiber bundle length and for pennation angle, both for the medial and the lateral angles, and also for the volume of architectural different parts of the muscle. They used paired t-test and ANOVA to compare the means and set their statistical significance at alpha less than 5%. Now moving on to the results. So the tendon insertion had an anterior tendon as well as a posterior tendon. The anterior tendon was cord-like, which blended with the joint capsule. Laterally, it was extramuscular, but as it came medially, it became intramuscular. On the other hand, the posterior tendon was quadrangular shaped, and it also blended with the joint capsule. Only its medial aspect had muscular attachments. Now, a point to note was that in 3 of the youngest specimens, that is less than 50 years of age, there was a distinct intramuscular tendinous slip, which extended medially from the posterior tendon, the relevance of which I'll be discussing further. So these were the tendon dimensions of the supraspinatus. The anterior tendon had a length of 6.1 centimeter and a width of 0.8 centimeter, while the posterior tendon had a length of 2.9 along with width of 1.6 centimeter. So you can easily see that the length of anterior tendon was significantly longer, and it was also narrower than the posterior tendon. Now coming on to the muscle belly morphology. So it had 2 distinct regions, anterior region of the belly as well as the posterior region. And each of the regions was further subdivided into superficial, middle, and deep parts. The average volume of the entire anterior region was around 15.4 centimeter cube, which was much more than the posterior region, which had an average volume of 2.5 centimeter cube. The fiber bundles of the anterior region attached to the anterior tendon, while the posterior region fiber bundles attached to the posterior tendon. Now again, in those 3 youngest specimens that were of less than 50 years, there was a distinct bipinnate mesial segment found in the posterior region, and it attached to the same intramuscular tendinous slip, which was found in the posterior tendon. So let's look at some details of the anterior individual regions. So I'll give you the orientation. This medial side is the scapula and the posterior side is the spine of scapula, while laterally it's the humerus. So the anterior region was subdivided into 3 parts. So the anterior superficial part marked by AS was attached to supraspinous fossa as well as the scapular spine, while the anterior middle part attached to the medial half of the anterior tendon. So this is the anterior tendon. Along its medial half, the anterior middle part was attached. And the fiber bundles of the anterior middle was in bipinnate fashion. The anterior deep part fibers were parallel in arrangement and they attached to the lateral half of the anterior tendon. Similarly, in the posterior region 3 subdivisions, there was a clear cleavage plane which separated posterior superficial from the posterior middle part. The posterior middle part attached medially to the posterior wall of supraspinous fossa, while posterior deep part attached medially to the base of supraspinous fossa. And both posterior medial as well as posterior deep part attached laterally to the medial border of posterior tendon. This here we are looking from the posterior side. So you can see this study captured all the individual parts and it gave assigned values to all the individual parts rather than a single segment as a whole. So these were the 6 segments and these were all the data which was given by the study. I'll focus on the important results. So you can see that the mean fiber bundle length was similar throughout the muscle except in the posterior region, where the posterior middle part was significantly more than the posterior deep part. The lateral angle of pennation, as you can see, is greater than the medial angle of pennation in all the parts. Now coming to the anterior region separately, the lateral angle of pennation of the deep part as well as the medial angle of pennation of the deep part was significantly greater than the middle and the superficial parts. While in the posterior region, the lateral angle of pennation was similar in all the parts, and the medial angle of pennation of the superficial part was much more than the middle and the deep parts. These were the important results which I just told. So after looking at this, let's see what these results would help us in discussing about this pathology. So we can all understand that the musculotendinous architecture of supraspinatus is really complex. as the muscle has an anterior and a posterior region, and they have further subdivisions within each region in the form of superficial, middle, and deep parts. Also, each region has a distinct bony or a tendinous attachment. So this study included all enough parameters and gave individualized value to every part. So it made it easy to conceptualize the structure of the entire muscle as a whole. So the anterior tendon, we will see the tendon morphology discussion now. So anterior tendon length was greater than the posterior tendon length, which was in concordance with the previous studies. Now that small tendinous slip, which was found in posterior tendon in 3 of the youngest subjects. Now this was something new found in this study, as this slip was not found in other studies. The reason could be that the other studies, no specimen were of younger age, all were of older age. Also, the slip was deep to the belly of the muscle. So while the previous studies did not dissect entirely the muscle, so the slip could have been overlooked. Now, the importance of this slip, along with the correlation of age, a further study in the form of maybe force analysis study could be needed to determine the correlation of this tendon with the age of the specimen. Moving on to the muscle morphology. So the anterior posterior regions, the fiber bundle length and volume of both the regions, they all concurred with the data found in the previous studies. Now you see the medial pennation angle was less than the lateral pennation angle for all the regions. So the pennation angle being less, that means that the medial side is more parallel to the line of force, because the pennation angle is basically the deviation from the line of force. So since the medial pennation angle was less, so the medial side was more parallel to the line of force. So that means whenever the muscle will contract and generate force of contraction, the medial side will contribute more and will generate greater force of contraction. So that could also mean that the medial side will receive more stress during contraction and could be more involved in any shoulder pathology. Now, some unique discussions of this study, all the architectural distinct regions, the superficial, middle, and deep part were found within the muscle belly, and all were given individualistic values. The average fiber bundle length did not differ markedly among all parts. Now, according to some previous studies by Rowe in 2003, they mentioned that the posterior fiber length was longer than the anterior fiber length. Now, that could be a discrepancy because they did not document as well as define well the reference points of their measurement. So this study, since it documented well all the reference points, and it clearly mentioned that the average fiber bundle length did not differ markedly among all the parts. Now, usually what happens in any muscle fiber, as we move from superficial to deep, the fibers get shorter and shorter. So that means the deepest fibers will be the shortest. But in supraspinatus, the deep fibers originated laterally, but also inserted more laterally than the superficial fibers. So the length of fiber bundles remained same as we move from superficial to deep. Now let's look at what this whole discussion and study could help us clinically. So we saw that the anterior region volume was around 15 centimeter cube, which was much more than the posterior region volume. So that means that the anterior region will generate greater force of contraction as compared to posterior region. Now that also means that the anterior tendon will undergo greater stress than the posterior tendon during contraction. So it will obviously lead to higher incidence of anterior tendon tears. And that was also reported in studies by Huang et al. Coming to the pennation angle, we saw that the pennation angle was significantly different between different parts, especially in the anterior tendon. So the stresses throughout the anterior tendon will be heterogeneous. Now, larger pennation angle of the deep part again means that the middle part, which had a smaller pennation angle, will generate greater force. Since there are different pennation angles and different contraction forces stressing the tendon simultaneously, so it will lead to greater shear stresses to the anterior tendon. That will again lead to it being more commonly involved in shoulder pathologies. Now, this study paved the way for, or could pave the way for future implications, as it could be used to investigate the dynamic function of each architecturally distinct part. You could plan a USG or electromyography studies using this architectural map laid down by the study. And as in whole, this will help us understand the normal as well as pathologic function of supraspinatus in vivo. So these were, I think, some of the very good points of this study. The study rationale was very well researched and well thought of, considering the results of previous studies. Also, the study included enough architectural parameters so that it could help us to make it easy to conceptualize the entire muscle as a whole. Now, the study took measurements in vivo, that is, while the muscle was still attached to the cadaver, as opposed to the previous studies, which usually used to excise the muscle. So there could be no discrepancy in any value obtained from this study. Also, the study described various parameters for each distinct region and not within just gave a average value to one whole muscle. So again, it helps us to understand each part and conceptualize the muscle as a whole. All the points of location, the reference points, the attachment points of tendon, as well as bony insertions were very well defined in this study. Also, while using the statistical tools, the researchers maintained an alpha point less than 5%, which was also two-sided. But as all the studies have pros, these I think are the ways in which I feel the study could have been better. So the first point was that the sample size was only 10, which I feel is very less because as we saw in previous studies, they had used samples of 50, 60 or 70. So the sample size could have been more to generalize this result to the population. Then they mentioned that all the female cadavers had some tendon pathologies, and so they were excluded. But I feel that female cadavers without any tendon pathologies could have been identified and included, so that there is no gender bias or any gender discrepancy within the values. Now, the unique part which they found on this study was the tendinous slip in young specimens. So they could have conducted a force analysis study as an extension to this study. So that could have helped us realize the clinical importance of that slip or its correlation with the age of the specimen. And again, last point is that since this was based on convenience sampling and not probability sampling, so I doubt that there is any significance of using a paired t-test or ANOVA test. And also since the sample size was only 10, so I don't think the study results could be generalized to a population as a whole. So I feel these are all the points regarding the study, and that's all from my side. Thank you. And any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Which journal is this published in?
Pardon, sir?
Samitra, which journal has this study been published in?
Sir, Surgical Anatomy Journal, and also in PubMed I found it. Basically, the Surgical Anatomy
Okay, it's a
Journal of
PubMed Index journal, is it?
yeah, it's a PubMed.
Okay. And what made you select this particular article of whatever options you had? Why did you select this particular article?
Okay, sir. So I basically I was told to like do a topic on anatomy because of the like audience of the first
Okay.
years also. So while anatomy, I found
Right.
many articles, some based on teaching methods, some based on like nerve pathologies or the supraspinal or like muscle tendons.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
first chose on a topic which could be clinically related. So like muscle or nerve pathologies,
Yes.
not on some topics which was just
Yes.
based on like teaching methods. So I found like
Yes.
3-4 articles in that on supraspinatus, on pudendal nerve. And then the shoulder pathologies, I feel one of the most like commonly relatable topics. So I chose this study,
Yes.
one reason.
Yes.
Also, this study had like used some statistical tests also, and it was a very wholesome study regarding every point. So I thought it could be very beneficial to present this study.
Yeah. Their sampling was convenient sample, right? Whatever they
Yes,
had,
sir.
they dissected, right?
Yes, sir.
And they
This was
took
a
the
convenient.
measurements and looked at the architecture of the muscle.
Yeah. Yes,
So
sir.
as
Yes,
you
sir.
rightly pointed out, had they had a larger number and had
Yes.
they included even female specimens,
Yes,
it
sir.
would have been better for the general population. Also, you could have compared males and females
Yes,
and
sir.
seen the difference between the dimensions and architecture, whether it's really different or it's similar to each other.
Yes,
That
sir.
extra slips that were seen in the younger age group are interesting, huh?
Yes, sir. But I think they could have like extended this study so that we could have got more because those were found only in the young specimens and not in the older specimens.
Okay. Are there similar other studies looking at the
So,
supraspinatus muscle?
yes, sir. There are, as in the studies I showed in the table, there are like 11,
Yeah.
12 studies which I found.
Are they
So,
very old or are they recent ones?
sir, mainly they are old studies. One of the recent studies in
Okay.
2018 was conducted by Jeong et al. So they compared basically the anatomical regions and rotator cuff tear probability. And they also
What was
used
their
this.
sample size?
Sir, their sample was around, I think, 100. I'm not very sure, but
Okay.
actually
You
they
were saying
used
something. You go on. Huh.
actually they used this article only as their reference also for predicting the
Okay.
probability.
Okay. Okay. Interesting study. Out of my domain, but it was interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Amit sir.
just request Amit if he's around to give his comments on this and the
Yeah.
previous article.
So, yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Hello. Just a sec, sir. Hello. Am I audible
Yes, sir,
this
you're
time?
audible. Yes, sir.
Yes, Amit.
Yes, sir, you
So,
are audible.
just one thing I wanted to ask: have they published this study as a result of pilot study, or this they have come published as an original article?
No, sir, they published as an original article.
Not as a pilot study. So
No,
because
no.
on the basis of this study, have they gone up ahead? And sometimes what happens, because what, cadavers, probably, I don't know about other countries, in India also it's little difficult nowadays sometimes. So yes, they will definitely choose probability sampling, because you just can't pick one
Yeah.
from the cadaver. So that's quite fair. But what I wanted to know is, if they want to go further, and have they used this study as a baseline for further studies? So no, no is the answer.
Sir, they haven't yet. I searched on them. I even emailed the author, but they said they
Uh-huh.
could not follow up their further studies. Like this was the only
Okay.
study which they did, and they did not follow up.
Okay. Okay. Again, as sir said,
Okay.
out of his domain, it's totally out of my range also. But considering the parameters, yes, there could have been, there are the apt statistical test which they have applied. So very well presented, Dr. Ramesh, and well
Amit.
appreciated that you all are, both of the studies are not really, into the sync wherein people want to go into only for clinical studies. So very well, I would really appreciate the topics which you've both of you all have chosen. Talking
Thank you,
about
sir.
the previous study, which I really missed on, is very sorry about that. Is when you want to control the confounding factors. Okay, so at that point, you what you can use is multivariate logistic regression, where you can, with
Mhm,
the
mhm.
methods of multivariate logistic regression, you can control one of the factors which you think is a confounding factor. Okay,
Yes, yes.
because that particular factor can definitely skew the equation, or maybe it might change the equation, it might change the odds ratio related to multivariate logistic regression. So at some such certain points of time, they could have used multiple logistic regression, or multivariate, not multiple, multivariate and multiple logistic regression. So when you all go ahead with doing such kind of a study, where you really want to control one of the confounding factors and then see if the impact over the model, you should go ahead with the use of multivariate or multiple logistic regression. Thank you. Well chosen articles, both ones.
So, I had a doubt
Yeah.
regarding this Saumitra's article in the anatomy one. He had mentioned. Can you please explain the why these statistical tests are chosen, and is it like it will be applicable for a non-probability sample? Like we can apply PET test and all for a non-probability sample if it's like, how
I
do you decide?
Yeah. So when the sample is non-probability of origin, it's not advisable to use probability test. Like you cannot
Okay.
use ANOVA test, and you shouldn't be using
Mhm.
pair T test as such, because these are again non-probability versions or non-probability tests. But at the same time, you can go ahead with the non-probability test, like pair T ka, or the when you are use unpaired T test, you have Mann-Whitney test, you have Friedman's test, and your Kuxal-Wallis test. Okay, so both these tests
Mhm.
can be used, but ultimately, see, tests will be used when we also give you exercises. You might have yeah. So when you have to decide upon such things, that whether which test to be applied, and in such context when the sample size is really low, it is not about application of the test. It is about more of a whether you can interpret the test, or the interpret the test results with such a small sample size. Any which ways, it's a mathematical calculation, and ultimately it is going to give you the results. Okay, so it is going to give you some end value. So ultimately, it is not about which test to be applied, but can you interpret the results with such a smaller sample size. So, with all this test, you just can't actually, to be very frank, you shouldn't be interpreting the results with such a small sample size. So for such a small sample size, what I would advise, or what is advisable, not I would, what is basically advisable as far as the literature is concerned, to go with a basic test. When maybe you can just do a Z score, it will just tell you whether these results are according to the population or not according to the population, or you can use the sample t-test instead of using the unpaired or paired t-test. So instead of comparing the things, you can just go ahead with the simpler measures of central tendency or measure of variation probably. Over.
So,
Yeah.
in non-probability samplings, if we check if the data that we collect, if it's normally distributed, then applying the probability test is fine, right?
No, not really. When you have, there are 6 criteria of using probability test. One of that is, see, it doesn't, one, it's like, one side doesn't fit all. So you have, it's not like that you have to have all 6 criteria to be satisfied. But yes, it is one of the criteria to be satisfied. And when you have all these criteria to be satisfied, when you are using non-probability sample, more probably the data might show you that it is normally distributed. But there are more than just normal distribution. There are some more factors like heteroscedasticity of the data. Okay, whether that data is
So, can you repeat
internally
that?
heteroscedasticity. Okay, heteroscedasticity of the data, which will tell you whether that data not just normally distributed, whether that data has got interdependence. Okay, that's also important. Like age and height. So age and height will definitely sorry, weight and height. So weight and height will definitely be dependent on each other,
Yes, sir.
isn't it? So something of that sort will tell you about the sphericity of the data. Okay, so just not normally distribution, but also sphericity of the data and heteroscedasticity of the data will determine whether you really want to apply these results, or whether you really want to carry forward these results as results from the study. Okay, so ultimately interpretation is not it's more important rather than just giving the values. But as far as your question is considered, finally I'll tell you that if this sample is a non-probability sample, you should be wise enough not about applying the test but about applying the results,
Okay, sir.
or interpreting the results, not applying, or rather interpreting the results.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I am done with my comments actually.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you to all the mentors and the presenters. This journal club would be followed by a short session by a peer researchers, all the research pioneers in UG, like Kundavar hai. Yes, Amay, Soumitra, and Priya and Tejas are requested to please stay, and they can the juniors can ask questions about the presentations and anything about the research for them. Faculties, if they want, they can leave. Thank you, sir.
I'll be leaving now. Thank you.
Yes, sir.